What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. Ryze is a champion that we've talked a lot about lately, and he's been a pretty hot topic in the community overall because of how powerful he's been after each one of his reworks. We wanted to take a look at the history of Ryze, but we're switching up the format a little bit, and we're going to try our best to cut out all of the minor, boring kind of stuff, and just focus on the big moments, like his power level between the reworks, or his insane, crazy old ultimate, which is the ability you guys saw in the thumbnail. So make sure to let us know if you guys like this format better, and if you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, and if you don't, definitely hit that dislike, because if this video gets, let's say, 8,000 ratings, I'm buying myself some chicken wings, and let's get started. So starting off, we have the beta version of Ryze, which was all about stacking ability power actually. He didn't really have as much or really any of the mana scaling that became a big part of his identity in later seasons. Although because his mana costs were actually really high at the time, you would end up just building mana anyway. He did still have some mana interactions back then though, specifically in his W, which was a different ability, a toggle effect called Arcane Mastery, that increased his mana pool a lot passively, alongside dealing a huge amount of his ability power on basic attacks. His Q Overload was a single target nuke, but it also dealt 12% of Ryze's current mana as damage. Still, mana came second, and the big emphasis was really just on getting as much ability power as possible to just blow everyone up. His passive Desperate Power was a cool nod to this as well, giving him additional ability power when he fell below 40% health, making him even more dangerous as you got closer to killing him. Once Ryze had you in range, there wasn't really a lot you could do about it. His Rune Prison, which was his E at the time, was also infinitely more powerful back then, lasting up to 3 seconds and also preventing enemies from attacking or dealing any damage during the duration, as well as stopping their movement as well. I mean, maybe on paper, those basic abilities don't necessarily sound that scary really, especially since his W is kind of a toss-up, and sure, he deals a lot of burst in his Q, auto attacks gives him some sustained damage, and even his E gives him some pretty nice crowd control. The thing that really jumps out about Beta Ryze was his original ultimate. This is the ability we showed in the thumbnail, and we might actually reference it in the title as well, and it was actually an ability called Spell Flux. Spell Flux was later changed to be a basic ability of course, but back then it was his ultimate, and it dealt a literal crap ton of damage. It worked by bouncing between enemy units or Ryze up to 6 times, dealing up to 500 base damage per bounce to the enemy units, and scaling with a 100% ability power ratio as well. And this was a huge part about what made Ryze just so damn broken back then. By standing next to a single enemy with no other units nearby, Spell Flux could bounce between them and Ryze back and forth 6 times, so therefore the ability would damage them 3 times in total, and that's 1500 base damage at max rank, along with 300% of your ability power and raw damage as well. No squishy or tank could just stand near Ryze and expect to live. Near the end of the original official League of Legends walkthrough trailer, there's actually a clip of Ryze using Spell Flux on an enemy Ashe who's at about 80% HP, and it pretty much completely one-shots her with the ultimate alone, and it only bounces on her twice because there's actually a bunch of minions nearby. Ryze was one of the strongest 1v1 champions in the entire game, and Ryze actively encouraged people to try ganking enemy players with Rune Prison and Spell Flux as well. And that wasn't the only way to use it though. Although Ryze could use himself as a conduit if there's no additional enemies for it to bounce off, Spell Flux would happily bounce from enemy champion to enemy champion and just deal insane area of effect damage. With up to 6 total bounces, that's honestly just so ridiculous. We're talking 3000 damage from a single ability plus 600% of your actual AP that would honestly just burn out an entire team if Ryze was even just a minuscule bit ahead. Beta Ryze was the definition of anti-fun for everyone except the guy wandering around using Spell Flux on lonely enemies. The insanely overpowered Ryze run wouldn't last though, and fairly early on in Season 1, Ryze received his first gameplay update. Ryze shuffled around his ability names a bit, starting with his passive, which became Arcane Mastery, which whenever Ryze cast a spell, all other spells received the cooldown reduction of 1.5 seconds. This new passive was the major mechanic of what turned Ryze into the now machine gun mage kind of playstyle, letting him spam his abilities as long as he has the mana to do it. His Overload also received a change that lowered his base damage and AP ratios overall, but gave it a lot more mana scaling through 10% of his maximum mana rather than 12% of his current mana. It also got a cooldown and mana cost reduction to help go along with his new spam-happy playstyle, and his Rune Prison was swapped to his W and received a healthy duration nerf to balance it out a bit, although it also had a cooldown reduction so that Ryze could recast it a little bit more quickly. The craziest change was of course to his ultimate Spell Flux. It actually became his E at this point and was stripped of pretty much most of the power that just made it so scary. It had a huge damage and scaling nerf and could only bounce 5 times now instead of 6, but it was also given a magic resistance debuff of 15 to every enemy it hit, up to a total of 5 stacks. It also bounced way quicker and basically worked as a way to just strip an enemy of its defenses while Ryze burned through their health with his other abilities. This wouldn't really have been enough to make Ryze that much of a threat though, so his new ultimate, Desperate Power, which was originally the name for his passive, was turned into a way for Ryze to spread the love to all of his enemies rather than just one. Desperate Power would buff Ryze for 8 seconds, giving him additional ability power and causing all of his spells to deal 65% of their damage in an area of effect. The cooldown was surprisingly low at just 40 seconds at max rank, and it cost Ryze no mana to activate, so he just happily used it to tear through the enemy team in a grouped fight or to just push waves with his new awesome wave clear tool. The rework was a success and it made Ryze a hell of a lot fairer to play against, but he was still pretty damn strong in his newfound form as a sustained damage bruiser, rather than a crazy burst machine that he was back in beta. The next step in Ryze's evolution comes a while later with his second gameplay update. Ryze seemed to like the more spammy playstyle and decided to push it a little bit further. So they cut the damage of his Q almost in half, but actually reduced the cooldown of it by over half as well to compensate, letting him use it just way more often and turning it into a super effective farming tool for tricky lanes as well. His Rune Prison was changed to deal upfront damage rather than the old effect which dealt damage over time, and Rune Prison was also given some mana scaling of Ryze's maximum mana as bonus damage. It also had the duration nerf to make Ryze a little bit less of a nightmare to deal with once he had you in his snare, of course. His Spell Flux was still a little bit too dominant honestly, so it was rebalanced, putting it on a longer cooldown and lowering the damage, but also reducing the mana cost. The cooldown nerf was kinda just to help it rebalance it with his passive, and Overload was way more spammable at this point, so it was reducing his other cooldowns via Arcane Mastery just constantly. His ultimate was hit with a big change too. Desperate Power had its bonus ability power buff removed on it, and the area of effect damage percentage was reduced to 50%, but instead it was given passive mana and 15% spell vamp when active actually. And this change really committed Ryze to being a lot more about mana and cooldown reduction and rotating your combos rather than just straight up ability power with all of those AP ratio nerfs, and it really set him up to deal super awesome sustained damage through the repeated casts of just a bunch of abilities in a fight. At this point is the kit that Ryze kept for pretty much most of the game's history, and it's the version of Ryze that pretty much all of you guys are going to remember right up until Season 5. Ryze was a notoriously powerful tool in the arsenal of many competitive League of Legends teams, but one of the most notorious Ryze players was Alex Each of Moscow 5. The EU team had their first major break at IEM Kiev, where Alex Each stepped up and made a name for himself with his favorite champion on the big stage, being of course Ryze. There was only a single Moscow 5 game at IEM Kiev where Ryze wasn't picked or banned, and Moscow 5 showed up big time, only dropping a single game the whole time to TSM in the finals. Ryze's power and Alex Each's skill with the champion was a huge part of his performance, and it really set the stage for Ryze's career in competitive League in the seasons following. He's pretty much never been weak for the entire history of the game since then, which meant players were pretty interested to hear that he was being reworked a third time in Season 5. The Season 5 rework by itself wasn't entirely that terrifying. It turned his Q into a skill shot, tweaked his Rune Prison stats a bit, and changed his spell flexibility by causing it to return to its initial target instead. The big change of course was in his passive Arcane Mastery. It caused Ryze to stack up on spell casts, and once he reaches 5 stacks he would gain a movement speed buff, a mana based shield, and cause his ability cast to lower the cooldowns of his other abilities as well. And combined with his new passive cooldown reduction on the ultimate, Ryze became the official spam bot of League, well if he wasn't already, able to combo his abilities together to just destroy single targets in no time. He wasn't quite there though, and aside from an insta-kill bug with the Mura mana, he wasn't actually that strong at all for the first time in his career in years. Ryze swiftly dished out some buffs though in a follow-up patch, and Ryze instantly, just like that, became one of the most broken champions in the history of League of Legends. His permanent snare combo just had little to no counterplay, and despite the fact that Ryze was kinda meant to be this insane late game champion, because of his passive and the power of the refreshing Rune Prisons, he was reaching a power spike way earlier in the game than he should, and would still just scale insanely into the late game. He could carry entire games just by himself, and became pretty much permanently picked or banned in both ranked and in pro games until Riot managed to finally tone him back down again. Riot viewed this rework as a bit of a failure though, unfortunately, because of this, and decided to look for a new angle to take Ryze that made him both more interesting to play and more interesting to play against. And from that was born his 4th and most recent rework. The only unchanged part is his W. It's still the same as his old Rune Prison we know and love. His new passive gives him mana for his ability power and damage for his mana, and he still has a ton of new awesome combos through the interactions with the new form of Spell Flux on E, giving him versatility and a lot more strategic direction. His Overload has new interactions with Spell Flux, and he even has this crazy teen teleport for an ultimate. And despite all that, he's still the combo mage and can still spam super hard on targets, but he's a lot more flexible and exciting to play, and still brings some burst damage now as well. It's hard to say for sure if he's going to be overpowered or not until a week or two after release on live, because it's difficult to get, anything other than just anecdotal evidence from the PvE, but for our full thoughts on his rework, definitely check out our previous video that we made a while back on it, where we go into way more detail about what you can expect in the future Ryze rework. Ryze is a champion that's been around for a really long time, and he's been kinda scary for pretty much all of it. With the new rework ready to be tested out on the live servers, we're excited to see if Ryze's new direction for Ryze holds up to his reputation and he's still gonna be broken, but hopefully he's not gonna be too strong and end up resulting in a 5th rework down the line. Definitely leave us a comment with your thoughts on Ryze's history and what you expect to see from his rework, and looks like that's gonna be it for me. If you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like, subscribe if you want. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.